Good afternoon, Mr. Bania.
Good afternoon.
Can you briefly reintroduce yourself to the jury, please?
Yes, hi, Doug Bania. I am from Nevium Intellectual Property Consultants based in San Diego. I value intellectual property. I provide litigation support in infringement and defamation cases, as I'm doing today. And I use internet and social media analytics in both of those services.
Since you last testified in this case, the jury has heard testimony from Ronald Schnell and Catherine Arnold. Are you familiar with their testimony?
Yes.
Were you asked to analyze their testimony and provide opinions in response?
Yes, I was.
Have you formed opinions in response to the testimony of Mr. Schnell and Ms. Arnold?
I have.
Generally, what are those opinions?
Generally, Mr. Schnell provided no evidence of a correlation between the Waldman statements and the hashtags and the spikes of those hashtags on Twitter. Second, based on my internet and social media analytics investigation, I've concluded that the alleged comparable actors that Ms. Arnold came up with are not comparable with Ms. Heard. And then thirdly, Mr. Schnell and Ms. Arnold both failed to provide any evidence of a causation as it relates to the Waldman statements causing any economic harm to Ms. Heard.
Let's dig into those opinions a little bit. You're familiar with the testimony of Mr. Schnell that there are more than 2.7 million alleged negative tweets related to Ms. Heard between January 2018 and June 2021?
Yes.
And what's your understanding of how Mr. Schnell identified those particular 2.7 million tweets?
Yeah, so essentially Mr. Schnell chose hashtags that he felt were negative towards Ms. Heard. Those hashtags range from Justice for Johnny Depp, Amber Heard is an abuser, Amber Turd, and the hashtag, we just don't like you, Amber. So then he used those hashtags and he searched through, using the Twitter API, searched through various tweets and then came up with any tweets that were using those hashtags.
Did you conduct an analysis of those tweets?
Yes, I was given that exact, the data that Mr. Schnell used on a hard drive. So yes, I dug into that data as well.
And what was the purpose of your analysis?
So what I'm trying to do, and what's at issue of the case today at this point is, were these tweets, did they contain the Waldman statements? That's what where we're at right now, are the Waldman statements. So I wanted to analyze those tweets to determine which ones, and if any, contain the Waldman statements.
And what's your understanding of what the Waldman statements are?
So my understanding is there's three Waldman statements that were published in the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail is a UK tabloid, and Mr. Arnold was quoted in three of those articles, and those dates were on April 8th, 2020, April 27th, 2020, and on June 24th, 2020. And my understanding that those quotes, sorry, I think I said the wrong name, but those quotes are the only remaining in this case.
Did you analyze the timing of the tweets that we were talking about as compared to the timing of the Waldman statements?
And that's exactly what I did. So I wanted to look at the Waldman statements, look at the dates that they happened, and then analyze those as compared to the Twitter data that I had.
Have you prepared a demonstrative that reflects that aspect of your analysis?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes. Did you show counsel? So 1293 will just be marked for identification as demonstrative and can be published to the jury.
Mr. Bania, can you explain to the jury what this demonstrative shows?
Yes. So this shows the total hashtags and tweets that Mr. Schnell was analyzing. This is the summary data. There are tweets that are running from January 2018 to June of 2021. And again, these are related to the four hashtags that I discussed. Whenever I get an assignment such as this, when I'm dealing with a defamatory statement that's allegedly gone viral online, where there's economic damages involved and there's a lot of data involved, I like to take the data and I like to do a 30,000-foot view of the data to see what I'm looking at, to see if there's anything interesting, odd, different about the data. And the first thing that I noticed is 35% of the tweets were prior to the Waldman statements. So again, remember, my assignment is to determine if the Waldman statements are part of the tweets that Mr. Schnell analyzed. So obviously, if these tweets were prior to the Waldman statements, in no way could they have anything to do with the Waldman statements. So that was the first issue that I noticed. Then I noticed what I like to call kind of the alleged defamatory time frame. And as I discussed, that's when the Waldman statements were published. That's the date down here. You know, the first one was in the beginning of April, and the last one, which is the third one, was at the end of June. But what I found interesting is only 2% of all of the tweets happened during this Waldman statement period. So really, these are just observations. And for me, there were red flags that I made note of, and then I just continued with my analysis.
What other work have you performed in connection with forming your opinions about the purportedly negative tweets?
Yeah, so now I realize that 35% are irrelevant and 2%, only happened during this important period. I just continued to dig into the 2.79 million tweets that Mr. Schnell provided.
And Tom, can we take that one down? And Mr. Bania, have you prepared another demonstrative that depicts that analysis that you were just describing?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
All right.
Okay, we'll just leave it as an objection. No, I'll give you time to look at it, sir. All right, plaintiffs, if you turn on your microphone, I'm sorry.
No objection as a demonstrative.
Okay, all right, plaintiffs, Exhibit 1294 will be marked for identification as a demonstrative and will be published to the jury.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bania, can you explain what this demonstrative shows?
Yes, this is showing the various spikes as it relates to the hashtags that Mr. Schnell testified about. This is actually an exhibit or a demonstrative that he used in his testimony. What this is showing are the largest spikes related to the hashtag Justice for Johnny Depp. I don't know if you remember his testimony or any of his demonstratives. The other three hashtags did spike at the same time, but a very small spike. So what I'm showing you here are the 6 top spikes in Mr. Schnell's analysis. And what's important here again is the very first spike and the largest spike, again, happened before the Waldman statements. So what I'm trying to figure out is what tweets were related to the Waldman statements. So this number 1 spike, which is the biggest spike, was prior to the Waldman statements, so it's irrelevant to the case. And then the second thing I noticed that was interesting here is here are the dates in gray right here. This is the time in which the Waldman statements happened. And you're going to notice, as we discussed before, only 2% of the tweets happened during that time. But I found it very interesting for such a viral event that has potentially caused such economic harm. There's no spikes in this area. And actually, you're going to see that Mr. Waldman, statement came out here in the first April 2020 article. Then the second one came out here, and then the third one came out in June. There's actually a downward use of the spike, downward use of the hashtags. So I'm not seeing any correlation as it relates to the Waldman statements and any spikes here as it relates to the hashtags Mr. Schnell chose.
Did you analyze each of the spikes that are depicted here?
Yeah, so what I did is I looked at the 6 different spikes, and you're going to notice that each spike represents a month. So the second spike, is July of 2020, and so on to the 6th spike going to April 2021. And what I did is, I don't know if you remember in my last testimony when I went into Google search, and I'm able to go into Google search, I went in and I typed in Amber Heard. And then after you hit search, you can use the tool and you can go back in time. And I chose each 6 of these dates to go back in time to see what was the media talking about back then. What was the general public being fed as it relates to Amber Heard back during those spikes. And what I found is none of them, well, actually I analyzed the top 3 search results because they represent 50 to 70% of what people click on. And I realized that none of them had anything to do with the Waldman statements.
Are you aware of Mr. Schnell's testimony that the tweets using the 4 hashtags he looked at were mathematically correlated?
Yes.
What does that mean?
So what Mr. Schnell is saying, which is irrelevant to this case, is the 4 hashtags that he randomly chose, they tend to go up and down together, and that's why he had these spikes here. So the correlation there is how those 4 hashtags work or dance together going up and down. But first of all, the hashtags have nothing to do with the Waldman statements. And the fact that there's a correlation with the hashtags is irrelevant to this case because we're dealing with the Waldman statements, which none of that correlation analysis he did had to do with.
How do you know that the correlation doesn't have anything to do with the Waldman statements?
Can I clear this at all? No. Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I know because that would happen right here. If when Mr. Waldman, one of his quotes was published, you would see a big spike right here. And then you would see maybe a little noise down here, and then the third time you might see second time a big spike, and the third time a big spike. That's not here. So that's telling me there's no correlation between the Waldman statements and this hashtag use. And then I've actually provided evidence that there's no correlation because I analyzed each of these spikes and none of them had to do with the Waldman statements.
Is mathematical correlation the same as causation?
No.
Why not?
I mean, correlation is simply a relationship between 2 or more variables or 2 or more things. In this case, the correlation question is, when the Waldman statements were published, at the same time, did you see a correlation with spikes in these hashtags? And again, can we clear this? You see none of that right here. It's actually a downward trend. There's no spikes, there's no correlation. So, again, Mr. Schnell provided no evidence of any correlation.
What correlation opinion did he provide during his testimony?
Well, he provided the correlation that the 4 hashtags, spike together. But again, the hashtags have nothing to do with the Waldman statements, and the facts that they're correlating or moving together is irrelevant to the case because the case is about the Waldman statements.
So what is causation then?
So causation is where one thing causes a change in the other. So as it relates to this case, did the Waldman statements cause Ms. Heard to have economic harm? In other words, did the Waldman statements cause Ms. Heard not to make as much money in her career? And again, Mr. Schnell provided no evidence of this. Ms. Arnold provided no evidence of this. And as a matter of fact, during Ms. Arnold's testimony yesterday, she didn't even know what causation was. She was asked, do you know the difference between causation and correlation? And she said that she's not a semantics expert. We're not talking about the words. When it comes to damages, you have to prove causation prior to calculating damages. So there is no causation that's proven here. Therefore, a damages analysis is not appropriate.
Did you hear Mr. Schnell testify that he agreed with your opinion in this case?
Yes.
And what's your understanding of the opinion that he agreed with?
Well, he agreed that he failed to link the spikes in the hashtags on Twitter to the Waldman statements.
Did he try to do that?
He tried to do that. But again, his analysis was looking at the word Waldman and looking at the word Waldmanian, and then trying to say that 25% of the tweets included those two terms. But first of all, Waldman isn't the issue here. It's the Waldman statements. And Waldmanian, I don't even know what that is, but it's not relevant to this case.
We can, I think, take that one down, please, Tom. Mr. Bania, what other work have you done in connection with forming your opinions about Mr. Schnell's testimony?
Again, the assignment was to determine if the Waldman statements were part of the tweet, so I continued to dig in, to the data. I believe the next step is, now that I've excluded, the 35% that was before the Waldman statements because they're irrelevant, I wanted to really analyze from the April 2020 forward to see if any of those tweets, contained the Waldman statements.
Did you prepare a demonstrative that reflects that analysis that you did?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, may I approach again?
All right. Yes, ma'am. Any objections, sir?
No objection as a demonstrative.
All right. We'll mark it for identification as plaintiffs 1295 as demonstrative and publish to the jury.
So, Mr. Bania, did you consider the content of the statements made by Waldman as part of the work that you did?
Yes. Yeah, so here I reviewed the Waldman statements again, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to determine what, if any, tweets included the Waldman statements. So what I went back to the Waldman statements, and I came up with key terms and key themes for those Waldman statements, which are listed here. The Waldman statements were about abuse hoax, sexual violence hoax, and fake sexual violence. So what I did is we're now dealing with a 1.2 million tweets because, we're starting in April 2020 because that's when the Waldman statements started. And what I did is I searched the 1.2 million tweets, for these three phrases. And I determined that there were 751 tweets that included those key terms, which is 0.06% of the 1.2 million. And then as I was sifting and sorting and analyzing this data, I realized that a lot of these tweets had the exact same language. It was interesting to see it was the exact same tweet because I'm analyzing the language to see if it matches one of these three. I realized that a lot of these tweets were retweets, likes, or shares. So therefore, I eliminated any of those, and it came down with 95 unique tweets. And then what I did from there is I analyzed those to determine if any of these terms were in there. And I identified 5 tweets that were related to the Waldman statements.
Do any of the hashtags Mr. Schnell analyzed include the words from the Waldman statements?
No, they don't. And, because I am rebutting Ms. Arnold, her testimony yesterday, she was saying that the Waldman statements caused these hashtags. Then throughout her testimony, she walked that back and admitted, no, none of these tweets have anything to do with the Waldman statements. They don't include the Waldman statements. These hashtags are only hashtags that Schnell, in his opinion, felt that they were negative towards Ms. Heard.
Based on your expertise, what are your overall opinions about Mr. Schnell's testimony and the Twitter hashtag data?
Mr. Schnell provided no evidence that any of the tweets were related to the Waldman statements. Mr. Schnell, there's no correlation there. He also provided no evidence that there's any causation that, the Waldman statements caused any economic harm towards Ms. Heard.
Your Honor, I'm about to switch to a different topic. I don't know if you want to break now or push.
All right. It's going to be a little while, I assume?
A little bit more, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Let's go ahead and break for lunch, ladies and gentlemen, okay? Do not discuss the case and do not do any outside research, okay? All right, we'll come back at 1:40 then. Is that right? All right,
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. All right, you may be seated. All right. Do you need to approach for a moment? Okay. Sure. Your next question?
Mr. Bania, before lunch, we were talking about your opinions in response to the testimony of Mr. Schnell. Did you also analyze the testimony of Ms. Arnold in this case?
Yes, I did.
And are you aware of her opinion that Ms. Heard's career would have followed the same trajectory as that of Jason Momoa, Gal Gadot, Zendaya, Ana de Armas, and Chris Pine, if not for the Waldman statements?
Yes.
What's your understanding of Ms. Arnold's basis for her opinion that Ms. Heard's career should have been similar to that of those identified actors?
Ms. Arnold stated that when producers or her industry is looking to hire talent and actors, that it's important to best understand the public's perception of the actors that they're considering, and that it's important to, you're looking to social media to see what is happening with the actors they're considering for either a movie or even an endorsement opportunity with companies. So that was her approach.
And is that the process she followed in providing her analysis of those purportedly comparable actors?
No. Although she stated that, she went in and brought in these alleged comparable actors, and without really the reasoning behind that.
Did you conduct an analysis based on your expertise in social media and internet analytics of Ms. Heard compared to the actors to whom Ms. Arnold compares her?
I did.
And what did you find?
Well, since Ms. Arnold stated that the proper approach is looking at the public perspective, looking into social media, and she did not do that, I felt that was the best approach to do this based on her words. So yes, I did go into best understanding the public perspective of Ms. Heard and the alleged comparable actors using Q scores. And then I also went and did some analysis online and on social media as well.
Can you briefly remind the jury what Q scores are?
Yeah, again, Q scores measure how well a celebrity, it could be a cartoon character, it could be a sports person, how well they're known, how well they're liked, and how much they're disliked. And it's an industry standard tool that's used. It's not just focused on the movies that they're in, but it's focused on them as actors, but also what's happening in their personal lives come to play as well. So that's how Q scores are typically used.
Did you prepare a demonstrative that reflects the Q score analysis you completed?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach again?
All right, thank you.
No objection to the demonstrative.
All right, we'll identify plaintiffs 1296 for identification and publish to the jury.
Mr. Bania, what point in time do these Q scores represent that are reflected on your demonstrative?
So these are the winter 2019 Q scores. that are reflected here. And what was important for me is I wanted to find Q scores that represented misheard after Aquaman. And remember, Aquaman is December of 2018. These Q scores were gathered January and February of 19, but before the Waldman statements.
And what did you find based on the Q scores that you looked at?
So as you see here on the left are positive Q scores, and the higher the number, the better. As you can see, Ms. Godot has the highest Q score out of the group of actors here at a 28. But you're going to notice Ms. Heard has the lowest positive Q score. She has a 9. So I find that very interesting that she doesn't appear to fit in as a comparable with these alleged comparable actors. I think what's also interesting is the average Q score for all actors being scored at that time, which include all the alleged comparable actors here, score at an average of 17. And you can see, again, she is 9, well below that. And then on the right side, you're going to see the negative Q scores. So this is how much people dislike you. So the lower the score is better. You can see Mr. Momoa is over here with the lowest at an 8, but you can see Ms. Heard is over here at a 28, which was quite a difference. A 20-point difference from Mr. Momoa, and also a 10-point difference, from the average of all actors. So she is very, very much little. Her positive score is very low, and her negative score is very high, which tells me that she does not fit in as a comparable as it relates to these alleged comparable actors.
What opinions did you form based on that Q score analysis?
My opinions as it relates to these Q scores is, Miss Arnold used these actors as allegedly comparable actors. But really, listening to her testimony yesterday, it appears that she's abandoned this approach. I don't think she's using these comparable actors or these alleged comparable actors anymore. She's more relying on her experience, and I agree with that.
Did Ms. Arnold offer a criticism of your use of the Q scores here?
She did, yes.
And what's your understanding what that criticism is?
Well, what I believe she was saying is that I should have ran Q scores for these allegedly comparable actors after each of their breakout films, which I disagree. First of all, Q scores doesn't work like that. Q scores are available twice a year, so it's not that I could pick a month or a different month for each of the Q score actors. So I feel that, what was important for me, and this doesn't always happen when I'm using Q scores, you can get this perfect moment in time, as Miss Heard said, but as Miss Arnold said, that, Aquaman was Miss Heard's breakout moment. So these scores reflect that breakout moment, and they're terrible Q scores.
How would your analysis change if you had used Ms. Arnold's logic with respect to the timing of the Q scores that you looked at?
I mean, if you really think about what Miss Arnold was saying, is she's saying that she thinks Q scores are the highest for each actor right after their breakout moment. So I would think, if anything, these Q scores could have been a bit lower because it's not right after their breakout moment. But what's important for me is the fact that these scores reflect, who Amber Heard was at the time before the Waldman statements, but after the Aquaman release.
We can take that one down, Tom. Thank you. What other work have you done in connection with forming your opinions in this case?
Again, taking the advice from Ms. Arnold, it's important. She says the industry looks into social media, what their followings are like, with the numbers as it relates to their followers. Again, what is the public perception of them? So I analyzed their social media accounts, but prior to the Waldman statement. So.
And how did you do that?
Yeah, so what I did, I don't know if you're all familiar with the archive.org. They have a tool called the Wayback Machine. What archive.org does is it archives the internet. So you can go back in time to see what websites and web pages used to look like in the past. not all the time can you actually get a celebrities' social media accounts to have been archived, but we were fortunate that each of the alleged comparable actors' social media accounts were in archive.org. So I was able to go back in time prior to the Waldman statements to see what the following activity was for each of the alleged comparable actors.
Mr. Bania, did you prepare a demonstrative that reflects your social media analysis?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes, ma'am.
No objection to the demonstrative.
All right, we'll mark it for identification purposes, plaintiffs 1297 and published.
Mr. Bania, could you tell the jury what you found when you looked at the social media?
Yeah, so what I found, again, this is prior to the Waldman statements. First thing you're going to notice here is not all actors use social media. You're going to see Mr. Pine doesn't have Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and Momoa and DeArmas don't use Facebook or Twitter. But what's important to look at is you have Ms. Heard prior to the Waldman statements with 3.8 Instagram followers and 142,500 Twitter followers. And then you move down to Gal Gadot with 37 million Instagram followers compared to her 3.8 million, and 2.3 million Twitter followers compared to Ms. Heard's 142,000. And you can then even go down to Zendaya with 65.9 and 17.2 million Twitter followers. What this is telling me is really, more people are interested in Ms. Gadot and Zendaya and even Mr. Momoa than Ms. Heard on social media. It just tells me a lot of people are interested in these actors as opposed to Ms. Heard, more of a following. Q scores, well-liked, less disliked. So it kind of fits into the analysis of determining whether or not these alleged comparable actors are actually comparable.
Based on your expertise, what are your overall opinions about Ms. Arnold's analysis of the so-called comparable actors?
Yes, again, it appears that she's abandoned this approach, and I agree with that. I feel that, through the Q-score analysis and the social media analysis, that they're just not comparable.
Tom, we can take that one down. Mr. Bania, based on all the analysis you did in this case, what are your overall opinions?
Yes, my overall opinions are that Mr. Schnell failed to prove any causal connection with the Waldman statements and the search or the hashtag activity, those spikes as it relates to Twitter. There's no causal connection there. My second opinion is, based on my social media and Q-score analysis, Ms. Arnold's alleged comparable actors are not comparable. And then third, Ms. Arnold and Mr. Schnell both failed to prove any causation as it relates to the Waldman statements causing economic harm to Ms. Heard. So, as a damages expert, which Ms. Arnold is, you need to take into consideration causation before you can calculate damages. You look at damages and you look at this allegedly damaging event, and not only do you have to prove that 100% of the damage is because of these Waldman statements, she didn't even consider COVID. It happened at the same time. A lot of actors probably made a lot less money because of COVID. Maybe films didn't get made. And, when you do an analysis of damages, you prove causation, but you also have to look at everything else that might have caused this alleged economic harm. And she didn't look into any of that. She didn't even know what causation was. So I don't think damages is an appropriate approach in this case.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bania.
Hi.
Yeah, you're not a damages expert, correct?
I am a damages expert, but not providing any quantitative damages opinions in this case.
In this case, okay. And is it your testimony that only if a person repeats the Waldman-Depp statements could they be related to the defamation?
Say that one more time?
Are you saying that a person literally has to repeat the Waldman-Depp statements in a tweet for them to be related to the defamation?
No, if you looked at my analysis, I did pick the 3 themes as it relates to the tweets, and I analyzed those themes, and I came up with 5 examples of when those themes were used.
And you ran searches for, quote, abuse hoax, sexual violence hoax, and fake sexual violence, and you ran all those in quotes, correct?
I did.
So only if a person used a tweet with those words in that order and with that spacing would they hit on your searches, correct?
Objection, compound.
Overruled.
Yeah, so I used them in quotes because, hoax could be used in many other contexts. So I wanted to make sure I was fitting my search with the theme of the Waldman statements.
So if someone tweeted misheard faked sexual violence, that wouldn't appear in your searches, correct? Faked with an ED.
It would not.
Okay. And if they use 2 spaces between abuse and hoax, that wouldn't fit in your search.
That's correct.
Okay. Did you? And a tweet can only be 280 characters, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So certain of the Waldman Depp statements, a person could not tweet the whole thing in one tweet, correct? The whole statement in one tweet.
The Waldman statements?
Correct.
No, you could not tweet those entire quotes.
Did you make any determination if there was an online bullying campaign against Mr. Depp after Ms. Heard's op-ed?
I didn't look into any online bullying campaign for Ms. Heard nor Mr. Depp.
Did you determine if there were tweets harassing Mr. Depp that quoted from Ms. Heard's op-ed?
No, my assignment was to determine if the Waldman statements were part of the tweets that Mr. Schnell provided. I was rebutting him.
And in your analysis of when you testified before, you never looked to see if the op-ed was quoted anywhere, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach?
All right, questions withdrawn. Next question.
Now, you have no objection to Ms. Arnold's use of comparables, correct? Just the use of comparables in general.
I listened to her testimony and my understanding that she abandoned that approach. But as it relates to my testimony today, my opinion was related to those specific alleged comparable actors, that they were not comparable.
You're not offering an opinion as to who the appropriate comparables should be to Ms. Heard, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you testified just before about the Q scores of Ms. Heard and the comparables. That was Plaintiff's Exhibit 1296, correct?
I don't know what 1296 means.
Okay. The demonstrative in front of you.
Mine? Yes, that's correct.
And you said that those were all for the winter of 2019?
I said Ms. Heard's were from the winter of 2019.
Because isn't it true that none of the rest of these people were from the winter of 2019, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. In fact, Mr. Momoa's was from the summer of 2020?
That's correct. Not all alleged comparable actors had Q scores for that date. What was important for me is to give Ms. Heard's Q scores right after Aquaman, but before the Waldman statements.
So you weren't comparing apples to apples, correct?
I wouldn't say that. I'm saying that it's not the exact same years.
Well, so in the winter of 2019, that Q score comes out. That the field work dates for that is from January 22nd, 2019 to February 7th, 2019, correct?
That is correct.
So that would be so the field work would be starting almost immediately after Aquaman just came out, correct?
Yeah, in her Star is Born moment, yes.
You'd agree that for the winter of 2020, where you took Jason Momoa's Q score, would have more time to account for the rise in popularity of the film Aquaman, correct?
Well, actually, if I use Ms. Arnold's suggestion, the celebrities tend to have, the celebrity moment right after they have their breakout film. So I disagree with that. I think maybe his Q scores could be lower as it relates to when I use them.
You'd agree that for the winter of 2020, Mr. Momoa's Q score would have more time to account for the rise in popularity of the film Aquaman?
I don't know if it accounts for the rise of popularity. Again, using Ms. Arnold's words, usually a Q score will be the highest right after the film, like I did measure Ms. Heard.
All right. Do you show? Thank you.
If you look on page 177 of your deposition transcript, you see that?
I don't see a page. Is that what you handed me?
You don't see page 177? At the 4 pages per.
Oh, yes, thank you.
And I asked you at lines 6 through 10, you'd agree that for the winter of 2020, Jason Momoa's Q-score would have more time to account for the rise of popularity in the film Aquaman, and you answered yes.
At that time, as I am a rebuttal expert to Ms. Arnold, based on her testimony, I've learned something new from her.
Okay. You didn't look at Ms. Heard's Q-score for summer of 2020, correct?
She doesn't have any.
And Ms. De Armas had a lower familiarity score than Ms. Heard, correct?
If I don't have that in front of me, but if you're saying that, yes.
Okay. And Ms. De Armas's career trajectory has gone up since the summer of 2020, correct?
I don't know. I didn't analyze her career trajectory.
Okay. Could you put up plaintiff's trial exhibit 1297? That was the demonstrative. Ms. De Armas has less Instagram followers than Ms. Heard, correct?
Correct.
And Ms. Heard has more than double the Instagram followers of Ms. De Armas, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And isn't it true that you get more social media followers the longer you're on social media?
Not necessarily. It doesn't work that way. It depends on many other factors.
And so Ms. De Armas had a lower familiarity score and less Instagram followers, yet your testimony is that she would not be a proper comparable to Ms. Heard?
That's correct.
Okay. And you're not offering a different set of people who should be comparables, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. You can take that down. Now, you understand that Mr. Waldman has been banned from Twitter for life for harassing Amber Heard, correct?
I don't know that, but if that's the case.
And you understand that Mr. Waldman appealed the decision to Twitter and they have confirmed his ban for life?
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach on this one?
Okay, sure.
You agree that in looking at Mr. Schnell's data, 65% of the uses of negative hashtags relating to Ms. Heard occurred between April 1st, 2020 and June 15th, 2021, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you would agree that 5 of the 6 highest spikes of the negative hashtags were after the Depp Waldman statements, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And where you talked about the February 2020 spike, and the 65%, by the way, even includes the February 2020 spike of tweets, correct?
That's correct. Well, there was no spike in Feb 2020 during the Waldman statements?
Well, the spike in February 2020 was before the Waldman statements, right?
I would have you. Can we pull up the chart again if you want to talk about the spikes?
Sure. Can you put up 1294? Number one.
Number one. Yeah, that spike happened before the Waldman statements.
Okay. And there was hardly any activity in negative hashtags until February 2020, correct?
That's correct.
And you understand that the spike in February 2020 was related to the partial tape that Mr. Waldman and Mr. Depp leaked to the Daily Mail, right?
I'm aware that the articles were related to Heard admitting to hitting Depp.
And you understand that Mr. Waldman testified that Mr. Depp and Mr. Waldman met with the Daily Mail in person to provide the partial tape to the Daily Mail.
Objection, Your Honor.
Okay, he talked about what the number one related to.
What's the objection?
Sorry, lack of foundation and
I'm asking if he knows or he doesn't.
All right, we'll rule.
So what's important to me is the fact that this spike is prior to the Waldman statements.
Do you know if Mr. Waldman testified that Mr. Depp and he met with the Daily Mail in person to provide the partial tape
No.
in February of 2020? You don't know one way or the
It's
other.
irrelevant to my opinion.
Okay. And the spike in July of 2020 came right after the last defamatory statement by Mr. Depp and Mr. Waldman, correct?
The July spike, which is number 2, is not related to the Waldman statements, and there are articles related to abuse between Heard and Depp and feces found in Depp's bed.
And that's based on Google searches you did?
That's correct.
Okay. And the July spike in time came after the June 27th, 2020 defamatory statement by Mr. Depp and Mr. Waldman, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And 5 of the 6 spikes came after the defamatory statements, correct?
After the Waldman statements, yes.
Okay. Now, you testified before that you eliminated shares and likes of the Depp-Waldman statements from your analysis, right?
Repeat that, please.
Did you say that you eliminated shares and likes of tweets that included the Depp-Waldman statements?
That's correct. When I was doing my analysis, I noticed the exact same text was a part of many of these tweets.
Don't shares and likes disseminate the negative information?
That's quite possible.
Okay. And you agree, right, that use of the term Waldman or Waldmanian occurred over 25% of the time in the negative tweets toward Ms. Heard from April 2020 through January 2021, correct?
Although it's irrelevant to this case, it has nothing to do with the Waldman statements. That's what Mr. Schnell says.
You don't disagree with the search results, correct?
Although has nothing to do with this case or the Waldman statements, I do not disagree.
So if people are tweeting about Adam Waldman or Waldmanian at the same time as tweeting negative hashtags about Amber Heard, it's your testimony that they have nothing to do with this case?
The hashtags have nothing to do with this case.
That's what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And even if they include the negative hashtags with Mr. Waldman's name and Waldmanian, you're saying they have nothing to do with the defamatory statements?
All 4 hashtags that Snell used had nothing to do with the Waldman statements.
Yeah.
Waldman himself has nothing to do with the Waldman statements. We're talking about the Waldman statements here. Waldmanian, I don't even know what that is, but again, it has nothing to do with this case, and it's not related to the Waldman statements. That's what's important.
And the reason you're saying they're not related to the Waldman statements is because someone didn't literally copy what Adam Waldman said in the Daily Mail and tweet it out?
Well, I looked at enough tweets that included the name Waldman that have nothing to do with anything negative or the Waldman statements.
No, they must have had to have the negative hashtags toward Ms. Heard, because the only way that those would have been in the data you looked at would have had the negative hashtags towards Ms. Heard. It was looking at that universe, correct?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that the justice for Johnny Depp is a negative hashtag towards Amber Heard. So listen, the assignment was to determine if the tweets that Mr. Schnell presented were related or included the Waldman statements.
In your review of the tweets related to Ms. Heard, you cannot point to any that were positive toward Ms. Heard, correct?
Again, I was not looking for that.
And you did not review the hashtag Justice for Johnny Depp during the time frame from April 1st, 2020 to January 1st, 2020 to see if there were any that were not negative toward Ms. Heard?
I did not look into anything as it relates to anything other than what relates to the Waldman statements. That's what's at issue here today as we sit in court.
Okay. And you didn't form any statistical analysis to rule out the Waldman statements' impact on the hashtags, correct?
Correct.
You did not analyze whether media and press coverage other than the Waldman statements affected Ms. Heard's career, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Looking at the exhibit that's in front of you, where you have the numbers here, those you said are related to Google searches?
The 1 through 6?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. And can we put up plaintiff's 888? And we could just start at 1. Do you understand that your... Okay. Oh, thanks. And 888, it's page 76. These are the documents you relied upon for your opinion today?
Yes.
And are these the search, where it has the different letters? these are the searches that you ran for the various time frames and the articles that came up for numbers 1 through 6, correct?
No, I mean, obviously, document 1A is the Heard supplemental expert witness disclosure. These are documents that I used throughout the time I've been working on this project. So these aren't related to those 1 through 6 numbers.
Okay. These are documents you relied upon for your opinion today?
These are documents that I relied upon when I presented my designation.
For your opinion today, that you're offering today?
Yeah, these are the documents that, yes, I've relied on throughout this case.
Okay. And actually, Michelle, could you turn in this designation to, let's see. Hold on one second. Can you just scroll down? Yeah, keep scrolling. Just keep going. Keep going. Okay, stop. This was the chart you provided with your designation for your opinions in this case, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it's similar to the chart that we had before with the 1 through 6, correct?
That's correct.
And where it has the various boxes, it's talking about documents 6E through 6H, for instance, related to Depp wanting to have Heard replaced on Aquaman.
Yes.
And you prepared this chart, correct?
Yeah, this was part of my designation.
I'd like to have this page as a demonstrative.
Your Honor, I do have an objection, if I might be heard.
All right, you want to come forward? Page 99.
Mr. Bania. Other than so as I understand it, the way you determined that the tweets were not related to the Waldman statements was that you looked at time and then you ran certain Google searches, correct?
Correct.
And then the top 3 hits came up.
Correct.
And then you looked through the article to see if the Waldman statements were there?
So as it relates to any trending event, any defamation that's happened online, any allegations of economic loss because something went viral, going to Google, looking at the spikes in time and going back in time to see what was happening on those top 3 sites will give you an indication of the best results that were being served at that time. So something viral that's happening would appear most likely in those top 3 results.
And just so the record's clear, if we could go back to page 76 of this document. Numbers 6A through 6N going to the next page. Those are the headlines of the searches that you found?
Correct.
Okay. And you don't disagree that that negative tweets toward Ms. Heard have continued throughout the analysis of the tweets, correct?
I'm not looking at whether they're negative tweets or those hashtags are negative. I'm determining if those tweets are related to the Waldman statements.
Well, okay, and you have no opinion whether the tweets were positive or negative towards Ms. Heard. That's what you're saying?
Yes, I'm just analyzing whether or not they're related to the Waldman statements.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing further.
All right, redirect.
I have no further questions of this witness, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Bania.
Yes.
Sir, you can leave the courtroom, please.
Thank you.
All right, your next witness.